following along that adage of planning the work and then working the plan is something that was mentioned in the last video related to the plan schedules is something called the work plan. You might have seen in the schedule itself, we called something a construction guide that then ultimately involved all of the work plans that go within it. The work plan itself is intended to plan the work on paper. And by doing it on paper, it helps not only the folks putting it together, but the overall team to understand what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and what's important about it. Ultimately, by planning it on paper, it should and will help to mitigate any issues that may arise in country, which, as you've been briefed on, it tends to be harder to overcome than it would be if you were stateside. So the template is within the overall workbook to give you examples and some descriptions on how to follow through with it. One thing that I like to do with some of the teams that I work with is to actually build one with something that's a little more tangible, because things that we tend to do on the construction side may or may not be that familiar to folks that have had that much experience, not only just with construction, but building things in general, which isn't a bad thing. Nobody's expected to have that kind of background ahead of time. It helps, but it's not necessarily a requirement. So one of the examples that we'll pull up here is, in this case, we are making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I think that's something that most folks can kind of wrap their head around as far as what that task is and what to do. So as we walk through it in the work description, we would spell out what it is that we're doing. In this case, we're saying to help with sustenance during study before midterms, we are planning on building 3 of these peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to bring with us to the library, assuming you can bring food in, but that's besides the point. The whole intent of this exercise is just to be able to walk through and understand what's in there. So the things that we would think through is, crew makeup. How many people do we need? In this case, we're saying a laborer. We would need 1 person. As far as any engineering or survey support in this instance, I don't think we need any engineers to figure out what type of viscosity or any of those calculations are needed in order to create the sandwich. So in this box, we're going to say there's none. And the reason that there's lead time in here is if there are things like that that are identified, we want to take a look at how long do we need to allocate for that type of analysis to occur, so that we could then pull that back into our overall plan and make sure that we've got enough time allocated to doing those tasks. Once we've thought through those steps, we then map out the overall scope of work and the steps to accomplish that task. In this case, we're showing 5 steps. First being procuring the materials, and then also then toasting the bread. In this case, we decided to toast all 6, and then placing the jelly on half of those pieces and placing peanut butter on the other half, and then combining them. So that's just one way to think about, hey, how do we sequentially step through what needs to be done? And the same would go when you go to build the bridge, in which case we would look at what needs to happen on the excavation, whether it be how to lay it out, where to mark it, how to then identify how deep you have to go, and walk through those steps. So it's a similar process. But let's continue on with this example. So materials that you would need, in this case, we're identifying, hey, we need to have bread, and then jelly and peanut butter. And the things that you'll notice on here is that we're specifying some details so that there's no mistaking what it needs to be. In this case, we're calling out for oat nut bread, along with some Smucker's grape jelly, and then some Jif peanut butter smooth. The reason we think through it in that amount of detail is so that when we map it out in country, there's materials that we want to get ahead of time, and we need to know exactly what they are. Conversely, for things that are in country, if we know exactly what we're looking for, um, we'll understand the details of if we cannot find that exact item, what's equal or better, given what's available in the country. After we've figured out what materials we've got, we look at what tools do we need. In this case, we're looking at, in a butter knife. So nothing too crazy on that end, but equipment. So we identified earlier that we were going to need a toaster. But when you think through all the logistics, you want to take a look at now, if I know that I have a toaster, do I need a generator or some sort of other power source? So you're really thinking through all the steps of, now that I have a toaster, how do I do something with it? With a butter knife, do I need to have anything else? In that case, no. And then once we have an understanding of all the materials, the tools, the equipment, and the steps, what injuries could be possible? And so what specialized PPE would I need? In this case, maybe I'll want to consider what types of gloves I would need in order to prevent cuts. And then we'll identify the top 3 safety risks. These are things that you could think through as a group, as well as things in the quality department as far as what would I need to do to show that I did it exactly the way it was planned, and how do I prove it? This one tends to be more of a bigger deal stateside as far as environmental. Not to say that it's not important, but it's still something to consider. And be sure to ask your bridge corps if there's any considerations that you'd want to take into account for the country that you may be traveling to. So once you've got that overview done, then we would walk through step by step, how do you do exactly each of those steps that we outlined here in the left side of the page, and what hazards, how do we prevent the hazards? Are there any special specifications or tolerance that we would need to know within that step? And then also what helps you to figure out is your production targets. So for that step, how long do you have to do it based on the schedule, and how many people do you need to do it so that you can meet those respective deadlines? So again, it seems like a lot, it seems super monotonous, but at the same time, it's super important to be able to plan it on paper, then be able to build it in the field. So hope that helps.